which just says a hell of a lot about it. Okay, let's see what Kieran McAnulty has more questions. I'm just going randomly through this list here of stuff because, you know, all sorts could be on the cards.
So, Minister, I've amended my amendment to try and address your responses. And to be honest, this is exactly how committee station works. So it's really good to see that you are, as you said, at least willing to consider it. So, in responding to your concerns that the original proposal might have a perverse outcome, primarily focused on the disincentive that this may prove with landlords who would be less inclined to take on a pet if the bond wasn't there. I get that, there's some logic there. So what I'm proposing is to add wording to the amendment, a new, but 1B, so during this period, the 4-year proposal, after which obviously a pet bond can be issued. So during this period, tenant liability for pet damage caused by a greyhound, as defined above, so those that have participated in racing or been bred for racing, could be extended by up to 2 weeks' rent to account for the lack of a pet bond. So from the landlord's perspective, if they allow a greyhound, or a tenant with a greyhound, they actually, if there's damage caused, are able to claim more than they would otherwise to account for the fact that there was no bond. So in essence, if there's damage caused, the landlord has the ability to claim that. But the exemption of the pet bond allows more people to take on a greyhound without having to stump up with 2 weeks' rent. So you incentivise people to take on a former racing greyhound, and you incentivise landlords to take on those people, allow those people to take on a greyhound, knowing that if there is damage caused, they can claim up to what they would have been able to do if there was a pet bond. And I'm hoping that the Minister will see that this addresses his concerns. It's consistent with the intent of the pet bond. It will assist the government in the challenge that it now has in terms of finding residences for former racing greyhounds. I hope it's seen as a bit of a win-win. Like I say, I genuinely approaching this with goodwill, trying to be pragmatic, happy to work on specific detail. I'm not going to die in a ditch on wording or whatever. I'm just trying to find a way to make this work.
Mr. Chair.
Honourable Minister.
Well, I haven't seen the revised amendment, so happy to have a look at it, see it in its full context. I suppose my point would be, if you exempt former greyhounds from the pet bond rules, so that you don't have to, you're not allowed to charge an upfront bond, so that tenants don't have to pay an upfront bond, so that it's more likely a landlord will take on a tenant with a greyhound, or that it's more likely that tenants will go and get greyhounds because they're more likely to be able to have a pet have a home with a pet in them. But then you say at the back end of it, you can charge up to 2 weeks for damage. Why don't you just have a 2-week bond? Because that 2-week bond is meant to cover the damage. So it's sort of, I'm not sure, or maybe I've misunderstood the member's point, but I don't. Why don't you just charge a pet bond?
Mr. Chair.
Kieran McAnulty.
Thank you. So the reality is there's going to be a hell of a lot of greyhounds that need a home. There's going to be people that want to take on a greyhound but can't front up with 2 weeks' rent to issue a bond immediately. I know that for a fact because I've had people contact me saying, this is great, I want to take a greyhound, but my landlord won't let me. That's not uncommon, right? That's the whole point of a pet bond. If the rationale is true, that if we allow landlords to issue a pet bond, then they will be more forthcoming to the idea of a pet. It actually doesn't address the instance that for some people they won't be able to front up with 2 weeks' rent. Now, I actually agree with your argument that in general, if this was a proposal across the board, it's counterproductive and sort of misses the point, I get it. But this is specific for former racing greyhounds and greyhounds bred for racing. We know there are people that would take them but can't afford the bond. We know that there are landlords that would allow them if the tenant pays a bond. Exempting tenants from the bond if they adopt a former racing greyhound deals with that issue. Extending the potential liability if that greyhound causes the damage addresses the potential barrier to a landlord taking it on without a pet bond. I think it's a pragmatic response to both realities. If tenants wouldn't have an issue fronting up with a bond, I don't think there'd be a need for this, but we know that there are people that will. It's in the regulatory impact statement. There'll be some people that simply cannot afford the bond. And so it's logical that if that is a fact, that there will be people that would love to take on a greyhound but can't afford the bond. Look, we're not talking about thousands of people here. It might only be a couple of hundred. But when we're trying to find homes for 2,900 greyhounds, this is a practical way to help to get there.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. So I get what he's saying. One practical problem is that the pet bond system won't be operational until late next year anyway. There's a bunch of back-end stuff that MB's in the middle of quite a large upgrade to the tenancy system. It's pretty antiquated, to be honest. As I understand it, the bond system's called Bond 2000, which gives you a sense about when it was built. So it's 24 years old. So, credit to the last government, kicked off a process of upgrading. It's probably overdue. Actually, the first stage went live a couple of weeks ago, and there's other stuff happening. So the pet bond system won't be operational until probably late 25, early 26. So that that's okay, but we do have an issue in the next year or so around these greyhounds. So I think we're unlikely to support the amendment. I understand what he's trying to do. What I will do, give him a commitment on, is that there is going to be further legislation around greyhounds, which has been signalled by the DPM next year. So I'm not the responsible minister, but I'm happy to try and facilitate some constructive conversations around how we might look at this issue of rehoming in the context of tenancy law, in the context of that legislation. It may be that I'm just reluctant to commit to something here on the floor of the House, that we just haven't thought through. It's not a great way to make law. So happy to go away and consider it properly. And if it may be is when we legislate in the new year around greyhound racing generally, which I hope the opposition will support as well. It may be that we can do some, and it may be other wider changes around tenancies in relation to greyhounds, or I'm getting a little bit ahead of the government and the cabinet here, but it's pretty clear we've got 3,000 dogs to rehome as the member knows, and we want to make sure we do right by those dogs. So happy to look at it in that context, but I think I'll keep looking at it, thinking about it. But I think we're unlikely to support his amendment, but I acknowledge the issue.
Okay, so to get to some commentary. Greyhounds.
Yeah, I'm going to be blunt. I think it's astounding how much airtime that issue has taken up in Parliament. It just seems like such a minutia. I also think I have a real discomfort with the discussion because, like, on one hand, there's a part of me that thinks, wow, isn't it lovely that, like New Zealand is the kind of society where even something to this level of detail is being considered and talked about in the House. Like, that's great. That side of it is good. The part of it that is genuinely horrific and just makes me feel profoundly uncomfortable is, like, how on earth are we giving this particular part of a very, in the grand scheme of things, small issue, this much airtime, and not talking about, like, the genuine, like, violence that comes part and parcel with the reality of no cause evictions. Like, I can't.
I think
it just seems nuts, right? Like, look, great compassionate angle. I agree with what Kieran is saying, but I just, like, I can't reconcile the fact that, like, this is being talked about to this level of detail when we're genuinely, seriously, on the precipice of not have passed the law. Has it come into force yet, Sam?
It has passed third reading, which we'll cover a little bit later in the show, the third reading features. We're just at the committee of the House where they basically ask a bunch of questions. So, and I mean, the next one I've got there is Arena Williams and Tamitha Paul is lined up, so we'll jump a fair bit down, so we get out of Kieran's greyhound commentary, and hopefully to some real questions, because I know Tamitha will actually bring up the sorts of things about no cause evictions as being the standard operation of the practice, because that's what she's been championing about. She was doing that from the days of when she first ran for the council, when she was the student union president for Victoria University. That's something in there, and this is something that Tamitha would actually do advocate very well. Even when I think she's a nasty person who is a bit hypocritical, she at least knows how to make herself look like she's on the right side of history.
I mean, I don't have a greyhound, but I got a grey cat.
That's funny. The other thing too, like, if they want a solution to this that's fairly clean, like, you can get something like the lotteries fund, one of the many gambling funds, which shouldn't be a thing. The funds themselves are like a bit of sweet to make the nasty go down better, right? But you can use that to put up the bonds for people, like, period. Like, hey, if you're renting, you're eligible to have these, one of these awful schemes is going to put a bit of money towards rehoming the hounds from the industry that should have never existed in the first place. Easy.